There's many games that give me that nostalgia hit from my childhood, but there's one series that really left a mark. Fable. Little 9-year-old Jake got introduced to this game by a school friend, and I was hooked. And not just Fable 1, Fable 2, and even 3. My love for this series was so deep, I used to watch all the Inside LionHead videos, and this set me off on a path of loving games and even pursuing game development for many years. But this story is not about me. It's about a great UK-based game studio who was leading the way back when I was a kid, and maybe even when you were too, but then it all came crumbling down. Let's start from the beginning. Before LionHead Studios even existed, a game designer called Peter Molyneux created another game studio called Bullfrog Productions in 1994. That was before I was even born. They then went on to create very successful games like Populous, Dungeon Keeper, Theme Park and Theme Hospital, and with their success, Bullfrog Productions was then acquired by Electronic Arts in 1995, where Molyneux helped finish Dungeon Keeper, then decided to leave Bullfrog to create another company. With the help of fellow Bullfrog developer Mark Webley, along with Tim Rance and Steve Jackson, and they called this studio LionHead Studios. Some fun trivia: LionHead's name came from Mark Webley's hamster, who unfortunately died just before the founding. And this was seen as a bad sign, so they went for a flurry of other names. Black Box, Red Rocket, Midnight, Hurricane, and finally Red Eye, which was the unanimous favourite. But due to the name being used by other companies, and the domain for LionHead already being acquired, along with the connection to drinking with the name Red Eye, they decided to revert back to LionHead Studios, with their main goal to make crazy inventive game concepts, which they instantly threw themselves into with their first game, Black and White. A GOG game not too far from Molyneux's roots of Populous and Dungeon Keeper, but this time, they wanted the game to change how you played, by adding in a good and evil system, where your companion creature would adapt and learn to reflect how the player acts. But the development wasn't easy, taking longer than expected, leading to many delays, and in the end, taking 3 years to develop, and eventually being released in 2001. But the wait was worth it, and garnered great reviews and enormous sales. But with the success of Black and White, came some bad times. Molyneux himself saying it was an unmitigated disaster, leading to the studio taking advice from some financial advisors who told them if they didn't float on the stock market, their company was going to die. So LionHead Studios opened themselves to the stock market, and to make themselves more desirable, they were advised to hire more and expand to other games. But with the stock market not paying off, and now having a bigger team to look after, they instead turned to private investors to keep them from going under, whilst they worked on their new games, Black and White 2, the movies, and of course, Fable, along with some other cancelled projects like BC and Unity. So LionHead had a few ambitious creations, with the hope of getting them back into a financially stable position, so they were hard at work creating Black and White 2 and the movies. But with Fable, they weren't the original creator. That title fell to Big Blue Box Studios, founded by 3 game designers, 2 of which, Simon Carter and Dean Carter, also worked at Bullfrog Productions. But with the help from their friend Ian Lovett, they began to build Fable under a different name, Wishworld. It was similar, but a different idea at first. A game based around wizards and magic, where the world changes depending on your actions. But later would become Project Ego, and later again, Fable. Big Blue Box Studios was founded in 1999, where they started development on Wishworld, an idea the brothers Simon and Dean had back in 1985. But they would struggle to find a publisher that would take the risk on their ambitious game, ending up turning to Peter Molyneux and LionHead Studios for some help, then being bought into LionHead Studios as a satellite studio, where they continued to develop the game and eventually merged with LionHead Studios to help finish the project, moulding it into a very different game than what they started with. But they did catch the eye of Microsoft, who were looking for games to release on their new console, the Xbox. And with Microsoft's interest, development pushed forward, and Fable ended up releasing to the Xbox in 2004, with great success, starting a good relationship between Microsoft and LionHead Studios. But it wasn't all praise. With the game's approach to lovers love, there were some people who saw it necessary to send developers death threats and other hate over the game's inclusion of progressive ideas. This wouldn't slow the team though, as going forward they continued to push boundaries in their later games. But what made Fable such a big hit? Maybe it's light-hearted humour with some of the funniest NPCs.
Chicken chaser, do you chase chickens?
Its approach to the morality system, where every choice you made had a different effect on your alignment and could even change your character's appearance. Was it the creativity and the beauty of the world of Albion, and the amazing theme and soundtrack by Danny Elfman and Russell Shaw? Or was it perhaps the excitement Peter Molyneux garnered with some pretty rogue promises made about the game? Like the good old, you can plant an acorn in the game and watch it grow over time. Yeah, that just wasn't possible, was it? But in all honesty, it was all of the above. Fable just hit the mark and was a huge innovation in gaming at the time. maybe even paving the way for a lot of RPGs today. And we can't not mention the help from Microsoft who pushed the marketing of the game to get players over to the Xbox. But it definitely worked, as in no time Fable was becoming an Xbox staple, along with games like Halo, which will become more evident in the next part of LionHead's journey. With the great success of Fable, hitting a whopping 3 million copies sold, LionHead's other games didn't reach the same success. Black and White 2 released in 2005, along with the movies, with both games hitting approximately 100,000 sales, and ending up losing the studio money. And with the added strain of poor project management, this put the studio in a financial trouble. With these and other factors, LionHead Studios was in a bit of a rough spot, giving Microsoft the opportunity in 2006 to come in and acquire the studio. But they weren't the only company showing interest. Ubisoft were the runners-up studio who missed out, but Peter Molyneux himself said Microsoft was the perfect match. But it's still pretty interesting to think what a Ubisoft Fable would have looked like. Leave your thoughts on that in the comments. But there were some other changes that came along with the acquisition. Co-founder Steve Jackson left the studio. With LionHead Studios now under Microsoft's wing, they ploughed on with their sequel of their prized game. Planned for release on Microsoft's new console, the Xbox 360, so they began development of Fable 2. A more expansive game than the first, with an open world with various regions, all with their own unique atmospheres, a return to the morality system, but a little more fleshed out, and one of the best features of all, a companion dog. Then not to mention you could also accompany your friends, with a new co-op mode, allowing you and your friends to adventure together. Also, they did release some small mini games to go along with the game, and some reason I remember the pub games game, where I might have been just straight up gambling, but that was pretty fun when I was 13. But similar to the first game, it came with some delays, so they could further polish the game for a successful release, and successful it was. Releasing in October 2008 to a whopping 5 million sales, becoming the best-selling RPG on the Xbox 360, and also winning the studio a BAFTA, and also now referenced as the best Fable game. But after the feat of Fable 2, something seemed to change in the studio. And with their next game Fable 3 coming out much faster, within 18 months, it all seemed a little rushed. It was still a good game in my opinion, but something was missing. A lot of players disliked the approach they made to removing menus in the game, and instead adding the sanctuary, and the endgame segment, where you become the ruler, being too linear, and not what everyone expected it to be. But even after all of this, it was still critically acclaimed and still sold 3 million copies, but it was a far cry from the predecessor's 5 million. And there might have been some reasons for the rush. With development of Microsoft's next big thing, the Kinect, a motion sensor that allowed you to play games and interact with the Xbox through voice commands, or the camera without a handheld controller. The LionHead Studios was brought in sometime before the official announcement to help create a game for the Kinect, and that being Project X, or later known as Project Milo, which was unveiled in 2009 at E3, showing a video of a player talking to an AI child called Milo, who would recognize you, remember you, and even learn from you. But a lot of the viewers were worried of how real it was and how much was actually just marketing. Or at the time, more of Peter Molyneux's exaggerated promises that they had seen through the years of Fable. But ultimately, the game was cancelled as it didn't really fit into the idea Microsoft had for the Kinect, which aimed to be more like a party game system similar to the Wii. But the question is, how much of LionHead's resources and development time went into the work with the Kinect when it should have just been left on Fable 3, with a lot of the features in Fable 3 feeling unfinished and rushed, especially with the later half of the game. But the Kinect road didn't end there, with Fable's next game being fully based around the Kinect, Fable Journey, an action role-playing game where you use the Kinect sensor to cast spells and interact with the game world. But the game took a big diversion from the normal Fable formula, where you can explore the world and make your own moral choices, whereas the Fable Journey was more of a on-the-rails adventure where you'd be set on a path, probably due to the Kinect's limitations. And the Journey released in 2012 and didn't do well in sales, selling around 150,000 copies, and receiving mixed reviews, largely due to the Kinect's limitations. To be honest, I know for a fact this is where LionHead started to fall, as from this point, as an avid fan of Fable games, I didn't even play the Journey, and I didn't even really hear anything about their next game, Fable Legends. This is where it all began to fall. After the release of Fable the Journey, and an Xbox arcade game called Fable Heroes, the founders of LionHead would begin to leave the studio. Peter Molyneux and Tim Rance would leave to become founders of another studio called 22 Cans, leaving only Mark Webley at LionHead Studios and taking up the mantle as head of the studio, where they would begin development on their new Fable game, Fable Legends, a cooperative action RPG game focused completely around a multiplayer gameplay loop, and later transitioned to a free-to-play model, which we all know isn't a good sign. But after 4 years of development and struggling, the game was cancelled, apparently due to financial and business reasons. Then this would lead to the saddest news of them all, the closure of LionHead Studios. Looking back at this now, as a big fan of LionHead myself, I can see where it all went wrong. Maybe it was a sign of the times. Like me, the player base was growing up, and LionHead didn't fully catch up with the games they wanted to create. But it wasn't just the studio. Microsoft has now come out about the closure, calling it a misstep on their part, and seen as one of their biggest mistakes. And have now used this experience with LionHead Studios to influence how they as a company handle working with acquired developers, aiming to avoid similar issues in the future, which time will only tell, with Microsoft and Xbox roster of developers only growing. But it's not all doom and gloom. LionHead might have actually affected the game industry more than you realised. Let's start with the founders of LionHead. As said, Peter Molyneux and Tim Rance went on to continue making games at their studio 22 Cans, but Molyneux carries on some dubious practices with his games promises. Then there's Mark Webley, who left LionHead before the collapse, and co-founded 2 Point Studios with 2 other LionHead developers, and now makes great spiritual successors to the games they created back at Bullfrog Productions, with 2 Point Hospital and 2 Point Campus. And obviously, Steve Jackson, one of the original co-founders, was also the co-founder of Games Workshop, so he's definitely fine. And it doesn't just end with the founders, with other companies carrying the torch for LionHead like Pixel Count Studios, Flaming Fowl Studios, and Media Molecule, all made by previous LionHead devs and carrying on the spirit of LionHead. So even with studios from our childhood gone, the games they created live on. And the beauty of the gaming industry is, all the developers have gone to create on more great games for us to play and enjoy in the future. And it doesn't seem like Microsoft is fully done with Fable just yet, with a new game set to release in 2025, so fingers crossed. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, subscribe for more, and let me know what you thought down in the comments.